Hello my friends, today I would like to show you one of my most favorite kit lenses of all time, Panasonic Lumix G Vario 12 to 60mm f3.5 to 5.6 ASPH Power OIS, and also share my experiences with this lens. This lens is very small, it is just 71mm long and it weighs 210 grams, and considering that focal range of this lens is 12 to 60mm, which is full frame equivalent of 24 to 120mm, the focal range to size ratio of this lens is very impressive, and it is probably the biggest strength of this lens. I really appreciate having that 12mm or 24mm focal length equivalent. That is very useful for landscapes, and not all kit lenses give you that. This is obviously a lens for micro four thirds cameras, which is the reason why this lens can be so small, because it only needs to carry a relatively small sensor. The rear section of this lens is made of metal, mount is also metal, which is not always the case with kit lenses, and there is also rubber gasket around the mount because this lens is weather sealed. Big thumbs up for that. The rest of this lens is made of high quality plastics and it feels pretty solid. Zoom ring is sufficiently wide, but it is not the smoothest zoom ring, and the resistance is uneven, so for video work you won't be able to make a smooth zoom in, but micro four thirds cameras won't be able to keep the focus in zooming in anyway. Focus ring is much smoother, but the travel of focus ring is too long for my taste, and there is no hard stop to tell you that you have reached minimal or maximal focus distance. Zoom and focus rings are the only control elements of this lens. Switching between autofocus and manual focus and turning image stabilization on and off is done in camera. One thing that I don't like in terms of construction is that the lens is not fully collapsed at its widest focal range. It is fully collapsed at around 21mm. This lens is image stabilized. I use it on Panasonic G80 or G85, so I can take an advantage of dual IS2 system, where the image stabilization and lens works together with in-body image stabilization. That is a big strength of micro four thirds cameras. Olympus has that as well, and it means that at wider angles you can use shutter speed up to 1 full second and still get sharper image, and in video the image is very smooth, and in certain situations it can be a substitute for a gimbal. This is variable aperture lens, which is to be expected from a kit lens. It goes from f3.5 to 5.6. That is pretty common for kit lenses, especially kit lenses for APS-C sensor cameras. But what we need to take into account is that even though the aperture is the same in both micro four thirds and APS-C lenses can cover much bigger area with that aperture. So let's say that total amount of light that APS-C lens lets in is much bigger. That also affects depth of field. At wider focal length you just won't be able to create shallow depth of field. Hardly any micro four thirds zoom lens can do that at the moment. At longer focal length you can get some background blur thanks to background compression, but systems with larger sensors are more suitable for this. Focusing in stills is basically instant in most situations. In video it is a complicated topic because of the focusing system in Panasonic bodies. I will just conclude that AF in video is usable in some situations on G85 or GH series cameras, but it is more about the focusing system in the body. Take a look at my G85 review if you would like to learn more about that. And now let's take a look at the sharpness. Today I will not be comparing it to anything, we will just take a look at a real-world performance of this lens. Let's start with the testing landscape. Regarding the center sharpness, at f3.5 it is solid, definitely usable, but it won't blow your mind, and surprisingly I don't see much improvement at f5.6 or f8. At f11 the sharpness decreases. Towards the edges it is a bit different. At f3.5 the sharpness is moderate. It improves considerably at f5.6 and even more at f8, and there is also much less chromatic aberration at f8. At f11 the sharpness slightly decreases. At longer focal lengths sharpness is more uniform throughout the frame, and it is basically good from f5.6 to f11. The sharpest point is still at f8, but there isn't big difference there. To conclude the sharpness of this lens, just as any other kit lens, it is not meant to impress at 400% crop or for making large prints. Considering what this lens will be typically used for, which will be posting pictures on the internet or on social media, sharpness is perfectly fine, but if you want the maximum sharpness, you will be better off with some prime lens like Panasonic 20mm f1.7, or if you want the maximal sharpness for the money, I will suggest Nikon DX ecosystem. Basically the same can be said about contrast, sufficient for intended purpose, usable, but not particularly impressive. Regarding the distortion, vignetting and chromatic aberration, those are very effectively fixed in camera. Those cannot be turned off, and I wouldn't do that anyway because there is no profile correction for Panasonic lenses in Lightroom, but you can use chromatic aberration removal in Lightroom to get rid of remaining chromatic aberration that wasn't corrected in camera. Color reproduction is actually strength of this lens, together with Panasonic G85. I personally like Panasonic color a lot. This lens is quite good for video with some limitations. Sharpness is more than sufficient for 4K, stabilization is very effective, especially when combined with sensor stabilization. Autofocus is what it is, we have already talked about that. Rack focusing is possible with this focusing ring, although the travel is quite long, and as I said, zoom in is not possible with this lens. I have done about 20 reviews of wristwatches with this lens, so you can take a look at my channel about wristwatches for samples. Sometimes it was a bit of a pain because of that autofocus, but it is quite capable macro lens with maximum magnification of 0.54 times. So to sum up, I think that this is a kit lens done right. It excels where kit lens needs to excel, and that is the size and weight, focal range and image stabilization. Build quality is definitely above average among kit lenses, and weather sealing is a nice bonus. Autofocus in stills is great. Sharpness is generally very good, not super impressive, but more than sufficient for intended purposes, so I generally really like this kit lens. So thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. I will make some more comparison videos with this lens in near future, so stay tuned for that. And maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss that. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.